Professor Wesley, as always, thanks so much for your time. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech on defence and this shift in terms of its focus to be a much more Indo-Pacific focused white paper from defence?
Look, I think it's, first of all, interesting timing to come in the middle of a COVID crisis and an economic crisis, to be putting more big numbers on the table. It probably gives us a sense of how concerned the government is about the deterioration of our relations with China. But I think the focus in the Indo-Pacific has been there for some time now. What I would say about this defence package is that it's very maritime focused. So it goes back to really some of the traditions of Australian defence planning, particularly over about the last 25 to 30 years, which does seek to raise the risks of adversaries that are operating in the islands and waters around Australia to defend that air-sea gap, as it's called in defence terminology, using high-tech sensors in the maritime zone, maritime missiles, new surveillance technologies. All of those things are investments in keeping Australia safe in, and as the Prime Minister says, a much more uncertain and unsettled period in regional relations.
And do you agree with him that in a post-COVID world that the region, and more broadly, not just the region, but the world, is less safe?
Look, I think it will be certainly more unstable. It's difficult to put a figure on safety and whether safety's gone up or not, but certainly instability is going to increase. I think we're going to see severe economic consequences, which will lead to social consequences in some of our nearest neighbours, and I think we will see larger countries in the region, China, India, Indonesia, and others, continue to invest quite heavily in their own armed forces. So it's going to become a much more militarised region, and the armed forces of our neighbours are going to become much more sophisticated as well. They already are, and that trend is set to continue into the future. We've got to make sure that we've got deterrent capabilities that are up to, matching those or raising the risks of potential adversaries into the future.
Do you think part of this is being driven as well, not just by China, but also by the United States, our strongest and most important ally, and the fact that it's been a bit unpredictable, to say the least, in terms of the Trump administration?
Yes, it definitely has, and I think that the alliance's management is becoming much more difficult and unpredictable, as you say. But I think it also reflects the fact that the trajectory of United States-China relations is going in a worrying direction. The rivalry is deepening. The rhetoric on both sides is ramping up. You know that both sides' military preparations are being made with the other in mind, and so that significantly raises the prospect of armed conflict in our region, and high-end armed conflict. This is not sort of Vietnam War style contained armed conflict. This is conflict between two very, very well capacitied great powers. So that can have major effects on instability in the region and quite possibly draw allies of the United States like Australia into the conflict as well. We need to be prepared for that.
Marise Payne, the Foreign Minister, said this morning that all they're doing is about, in fact, avoiding conflict. So is that the strategy here, deterrence to avoid a spat or a conflict within our region?
Yes, look, there's an old adage that says if you want peace, prepare for war, and make yourself a hard target. Make yourself a difficult adversary to either attack or to coerce. And let's face it, we've seen an increase in coercive actions in our part of the world. We've seen China in the last decade attempt to coerce two adversaries. One was Japan and one was the Philippines. It got what it wanted in relation to the Philippines. It got those those bases and those islands in the South China Sea. It didn't get what it wanted in relation to Japan, the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands in relation to Japan. And there's a basic difference between the Philippines and Japan. Japan is a formidable military power. It's not as powerful as China, but it would make a conflict with China highly costly to the Chinese. The Philippines are not. They're not a serious military force. And you can tell that that was one of the key differences in how those two different coercive episodes resolved themselves. I think the Australian Defence Force and Australian strategic planners have taken very close interest and very close notice of what has happened over the last decade, and a lot of that thinking has gone into this defence package.
And do you think that the assertiveness of China in recent times has nullified some of the propositions within the political debate? Some within Labor and others have said that we should have a more independent foreign policy. Does that really neutralise that sort of argument, given how aggressive China has been in recent times, that we should be aligning to like-minded nations, the United States and others in our region?
Yeah, the important thing is the United States and others. So certainly the idea of Australia going it alone it no longer has real currency anywhere in the Australian political spectrum except at the fringes. But as you said before, the United States has become a little bit more unpredictable. It has become much more engaged in deep strategic competition with China, which means that it's no longer the sort of dependable alliance partner that we could have once depended on in the past. And that's why we've seen in recent years Australia work really hard at developing close relationships, close strategic relationships with other countries in our region. You might call them like-minded, or you might call them other countries that are worried about China's assertive behaviour and rise. They're countries like, for example, Japan, Singapore, India, Indonesia. Those are the sorts of relationships that we quite rightly have been putting a lot of time and effort into building strategic partnerships with.
Professor Wesley, as always, appreciate your time from University of Melbourne. Thank you for that.